Thank you, Will. So good to be with you all this morning. It's such a blessing to be able to come together and worship our God in spirit and in truth. We got a couple of things going on as a congregation to just be aware of. Yesterday, we went out soul seeking and hung up some flyers on some doors in the neighborhoods nearby and invited ladies to the Ladies' Day that is coming up. We actually had some conversation with a few ladies there in some of the neighborhoods, and that was very encouraging and a great opportunity, and grateful for all those who were able to come out and participate in that. Remember, the Ladies' Day will be Saturday, May the 16th. Saturday, May the 16th. And we have just a few flyers left in the foyer if members would like to take those with them. And I think if probably each member passed out about 2 to 5 or so, we would clean up the rest of our flyers. So we still have a few weeks to get ready for the Ladies' Day. So encouraged by the ladies and their interest in the Lord. They're interested in studying with one another and encouraging one another. And then also remember, we have our VBS coming up June the 20th. And we've been meeting on VBS now throughout the year, once a month. And we will have a meeting today as well. And so those participating in putting VBS together, if you could meet here at 12:45. Of course, we'll have our fellowship meal this afternoon, and then we'll have our afternoon service at 1. And so 15 minutes before our afternoon service, we'll meet to just have another level setting session just to make sure we're all on the same page getting ready for VBS. And so certainly keep that in mind. We are going through the parables of the Bible, and so we're studying in our devotional book as we go through various lessons throughout the week. And we are in week 17 this year, looking at the parable of the 10 virgins this week. That's what we studied together, lessons put together, and looking at Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 through 13. And we are in particular going to be looking at Thursday's lesson, where it's titled Shut, as Will read just a few minutes ago, Matthew chapter 25 and verse 10. So we'll dive in there here in just a moment. But before we do, I want to bring up some basketball. You know, it's basketball season. Our family is very much a basketball family. I wasn't raised up in basketball. I was a wrestler, not a basketball player, but my wife was the basketball player, and all of our kids are basketball players, and they can school me, by the way. Don't ask them how many times they've beat me 1v1 because they like to keep asking, and pig and round the world, all of those kinds of games. But I enjoy watching basketball, and even though I wasn't raised and brought up as a basketball youth, I was certainly raised and brought up in a sports family, and we played all kinds of sports. I did play one season of basketball, and we had a basketball goal, and I liked the sport of basketball. I like, of course, all sports, and so we've been watching the finals as the NBA playoffs are going out and coming together, and various teams we're rooting for. Of course, we're rooting for the Hawks, and it's fun to watch, New York lose. And, we're Celtics fans at heart, so we like to, see the Knicks lose from time to time. And there's one particular player on the Knicks named Mikal Bridges, number 25. And he has been awful this year. I mean, he's just not been been playing well at all. Even the announcers, they'll say his offense has been essentially invisible all year. I mean, I think he's got single-digit points in the playoffs in total, and they've played now, 4 games, the Knicks and the Hawks. And I'll make a comment sometimes, and Hannah will kind of rib me and, laugh at me, but I'll say, you know what, I could play better than him. And, she'll really just pin me down and get me to state specifics as to how. But I really do think I could. And she'll say, what would the Knicks fans say? And I said, well, they'd probably agree with me because they're upset with him because he's been playing so bad. I mean, that's just how awful he's been. And we all know, I wouldn't play better than him. And here's the reason why. That door has shut. That door has shut. And it's hard. Let me tell you, it is hard for a man to admit that. And I'll say the same thing in football season. I'm not going to say necessarily that door has shut. I mean, maybe, there's been some stories of some folks who can maybe do some things in their upper ages. Maybe that door, because I did play football pretty competitively. So maybe that door hasn't shut. But with basketball, look, it's just a fact. That door has shut. What does that mean? It means biologically speaking, in reality, in all practicality, feasibility, viability, I just don't have what it takes any longer, no matter how much I dream and how hard I try, to make the NBA. It's just not possible. That door has shut. That season of life has closed. It's over. And there's no more bringing it back. It's just not possible. Let's go to Matthew chapter 25 together. Matthew chapter 25. And let's begin there together, starting in verse 1. Matthew chapter 25, beginning there in verse 1. Then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, "Behold, the bridegroom is coming. Go out to meet him." Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "No, lest there should not be enough for us and you, but go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves." And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered and said, "Assuredly, I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming." We've been studying the parables of the Bible, or we've even mentioned that this could be called his stories. These are the stories that God provides us. They're not stories because they're make-believe or irrelevant or fantasy-driven. They're stories because God uses simplistic contexts so we as people can understand hard spiritual things. And it's hard for us as a people to understand spiritual things. God likens us unto sheep, for example, in Psalm chapter 23. And he is, of course, our shepherd. And so he uses stories because he loves us. He cares for us. He wants us to understand him. He wants us to know more about him. And so in this particular context, it's interesting because there's certain aspects to this we can understand. There's certain aspects we don't necessarily understand in our current generation, in our current culture. But there are certain countries, there are certain cultures, even in today's time, that you could go to, that this would be very real for them, the way that this is described. You have a bridegroom, you have a wedding feast, you have certain preparations that would be expected, and you have certain deadlines or cutoff points where, you know what, if you're not ready, too bad, so sad. Because of the culture and because of the importance of that wedding and that celebration and that ceremony. And that's the idea that we get here. There are other contexts that we can understand that type of time pressure and that type of difficulty and seriousness regarding preparation. You take, for example, maybe studying for a test. Have you ever had to take a test before? Have you ever had to take a test before and maybe you've been involved in a study group of some? You've had friends who are likewise getting ready for that test. I know, in college years and in certain parts of my life when certain exams were expected, that there would be peers that I would be involved with in studying for these moments. And in the very beginning, it's a lot of fun. Why? Well, because everyone's kind of in the same boat. They're a little scared. They're a little nervous about this test. They've all been in the class together. They all kind of have a similar understanding, and you're socializing. You're engaging in a way that's fun and exciting, and maybe you're having snacks and sodas and staying up late into the night getting ready for this particular exam. And eventually what happens as time goes on is the fun and the newness of all of that just kind of wears off. The reality of what you know and don't know becomes more and more clear. And there are certain leaders of the pack that are putting in the work and putting in the efforts, putting in the elbow grease, who really know what they're talking about. But as you get closer and closer to test time, those who are putting in the work and putting in the effort, they get more and more serious. And those who haven't been putting in the work and haven't been putting in the effort, it seems, can get more and more jokey and more lackadaisical. But then all of a sudden, the night before comes. And the folks who have been putting in the effort and putting in the work, they're already deep into chapter 10. And the folks who have been goofing off, they're not even really cracking the book into chapter 1 yet. But guess what? They want to really rely on the folks who have been putting in the work and putting in the effort. They're all of a sudden highly interested. Hey, can you explain chapter 1 to me? And something will happen sometimes where those folks cut themselves off from the group. You know what? I only have so much time. That test is in 8 hours. No, I'm not going to answer any more of your questions. You should have been paying attention for the 18 previous group studies we had leading up to this point. Because I have to get ready. That's a little bit of what we find here with the wise virgins. They're not going to expend themselves to the point where they put their own situation in risk. They're going to make sure that they're ready. And then the foolish virgins, they try to then all of a sudden hurriedly get ready. But what happens? Well, eventually test time comes. Eventually it's there. And if you're not ready and you show up after the time has ended, the test is closed. The door has shut. Let's look at a few points together this morning. Number one, only God, determines when the door is shut. And once it is shut, it is shut. We find that throughout Scripture. We find it here in this context, Matthew chapter 25, verse 10, beginning there again. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, Assuredly, I say to you, I do not know you. Let's go to the beginning pages of the Bible in Genesis chapter 6 together. See the condition of the world at that time. In verse 5, we see that the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Mankind is not only engaging in evil, but is strategizing evil, is planning for evil, is imagining evil, is pursuing evil. And the Lord, verse 6, is sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So we see then the instructions that God gives Noah regarding the making of the ark there in Genesis chapter 6. We then see the very beginning verses of Genesis chapter 7 and the great flood coming and Noah doing all according to what the Lord had commanded him. Notice verse 5. And just imagine this for a moment. Some accounts have estimated that based upon the length of days that man lived during that time, coupled with the number of generations that could have come about and the number of offspring that occurred, that there could have potentially been 1 billion people on the earth during this time. And so Noah is doing what? Peter says that he's a preacher of righteousness. He's building the ark. He's doing all that the Lord commands him to do. Verse 5 of Genesis chapter 7. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. What is grace? Well, God's instructions as to how Noah and his household could be saved was by graciousness. Noah didn't deserve those instructions, but God gave them to him. Then what did Noah do? He acted upon them. He carried them out. He did everything God said. But imagine what the rest of the world is doing if there's 1 billion people. We know that 8 souls were saved, according to Peter. It's going to list them here in just a minute in Genesis chapter 7. That's a very small number being saved, but imagine what they must have been doing. I mean, probably mocking Noah, I mean, we understand based upon the Genesis account of creation and what we learn regarding the way in which the world came about and what's going on in the very early days, that it had not yet rained upon the earth. And so Noah's here preaching about a flood, preaching about rain, building this ship. The rest of society is, I'm sure, just, what are you wasting your time with? Their imagination is on evil continually. We then see in chapter 7 there in verse 13, on the very same day, Noah and Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark. 8 souls. Notice verse 16. So those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. I don't know if you've been to the Ark Encounter around Lexington, Kentucky. I know some of you have been there. It's a fascinating event and just to see a depiction of what the ark would have looked like as they've built it according to scale. And to imagine the animals and imagine how all of this would have taken place. It's a fascinating thing to think about. And then you contemplate the animals onboarding into the ark and Noah and his family, those 8 souls being saved. How would they have gotten that door shut? How something as massive as it would have been perfectly sealed and closed out. And then again, the starting of the rain, what would then those people who would have been mocking Noah, wanting nothing to do with God, wanting nothing to do with what Noah would have been preaching, what would they have all of a sudden been interested in? Just like those students in that test scenario we brought up a few minutes ago, just like these foolish virgins in Matthew chapter 25. All of a sudden now they're interested in, oh, wait a second, you know what? I am maybe wanting to listen and be on that ark and be right with God. But what happened? God shut them in. It was over. Just like my NBA aspirations. Here's the thing. It is appointed unto men once to die, then after this, the judgment. Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 27. God, only God, shuts the door. And once it is shut, it's over. We learn this in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, because if we don't die first, what likewise could happen? Well, the Lord could return, but when do we know that's going to happen? We don't know. And Paul explains that to the Thessalonians in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 1. He says, but concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you. For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then suddenly destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. We may die first, or the Lord may return first. And if we die by natural means, or if the Lord returns, both of which we don't know when that's going to happen. And so, what do we need to do? We need to be ready. We need to be like the wise virgins. We need to be like Noah and his family. We need to be prepared. And as long as, point number 2, the door is not shut, guess what? There is still time to prepare. Have you ever had a teacher, when taking a test, come into the classroom and say, you know what, I know we were supposed to have our test today, but actually something's come up and we're going to postpone it to next week. You ever had that happen? Or have you ever heard of that happening? That's pretty awesome when that happens, especially if you're of the group that's been goofing off all the time, getting ready for that test. You're then like, man, yes, hopefully not. I get to goof off some more, but hopefully, okay, let me prepare. Well, we don't know when the Lord's going to return, but here's the reality. He hasn't returned yet, and we're still alive. So that means there is still time. And as long as there is still time, we can still get prepared. We can still do what we need to do. We see a picture of this in Matthew chapter 20, what we sometimes call the 11th hour man in Matthew chapter 20. This is another parable of the workers in the vineyard of Matthew chapter 20. I want you to notice with me verses 6 through 9 of this chapter. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing idle and said to them, "Why have you been standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right you will receive." So when evening had come, the owner of the vineyard said to his steward, "Call the laborers and give them their wages, beginning with the last to the first." And when those came who were hired about the 11th hour, they each received a denarius. They're going to receive the same thing as the other workers. But wait a second, they didn't start until the 11th hour. Well, the reality was that was the term. That was what was set up. And so it doesn't matter if you started in the beginning of the day or you started at the end of the day, the reward is still the same. And the blessing for us is heaven is not enough. That's not the right way to say it. Heaven is more than enough for all of us. And so it doesn't matter if it's just the beginning stages of our life or if it's at the end stages of our life. If there's time to prepare, there's still time to prepare. The door is not yet shut for us. Remember that every day that we have is by the mercies of God. His mercies are new every morning. Lamentations chapter 3, verses 22 and 23. It's a blessing that we even get to breathe air this morning and be alive. God has given us another opportunity to be right with him. Point number 3. Time to prepare can be deceiving. Point number 1, remember, God shuts the door. Once it's shut, it's shut. But point number 2, as long as the door isn't shut, there's still time to prepare. But sometimes we might say, well, that means I got more time. Wait a second. Time to prepare can be deceiving. You know, we're getting ready to go on our mission trip to Peru. I'm so excited and looking forward to that. We're going to have a party of 7 going, Lord willing. So thankful for all those that are going to be coming, several young people, and very much looking forward to it. And we have started preparing for this shortly after our Peru trip in 2024. I went and evangelized in Arequipa, Peru in 2024. We're going to be in Callao, Peru this year. And shortly after the trip in 2024, we started getting ready. And the trip isn't scheduled until mid-July. And we've done a lot of things to get ready. But guess what? We still have a lot of things that we still have to do to get ready. And there's lots of flights on these kinds of trips. There's lots of dependencies that you have to do beforehand in order to then get ready for something else. And then once you get that ready, you can then get ready for something else. And there's lots of ducks in a row, if you will. And just the flying alone can be overwhelming, especially when you start thinking about young people. And I've told Kerry Gillis, he's a member there at Forest Park Church of Christ down in Valdosta, Georgia. Love Kerry. And Hannah and I, just about every time we see him, we say, we don't really understand how you do what you do. Because he's not just managing a group of 7, he's managing a group of like 100 across congregations all over the country. But he pulls it off somehow. And just the flights alone is overwhelming to think about. Why? Well, because if you get stuck in a certain country or in a certain place, then you're stuck there. And if everyone else is left, that's a problem. And you got to find workarounds. And here's the thing about airlines. They have certain deadlines, which are before the departure time. And if you haven't flown before, just newsflash, if you ever do fly, remember this point, it'll help you out. But there's some people who don't realize this. And I haven't flown that much. Y'all know I'm terrified of flying. I can't stand it. But there was one particular time that I remember I was having to wait for a flight and was sitting around at a gate. And all of a sudden, the door shuts for boarding. And the plane door shuts as well. And, they pull in the jetway or whatever that thing's called that people walk down to get into the plane. And that's pulled back. And the plane's just sitting there, though. And you'll see people running up to the gate. I mean, they're sprinting. Okay. And you look at your clock and it says, 12:30. Okay. And the departure time for that flight is 12:50. And they come up to the gate and they say, but it says it's only 12:30. It's only 12:30. And, these gate attendants, by the way, it's not just one person. It's usually like half a dozen people who aren't aware. Yes, but the door closes 30 minutes before departure. And once the door closes, but the plane's right there, and they're like at the window, and they're like hollering. And mind you, on the loudspeaker, what's happened? For the last hour, they've been announcing over and over again, gate such and such, passenger such and such. Hannah and I almost had this happen one time. We were just married. And we had gotten Arby's for lunch, knowing that it was going to be a longer flight. And we had got there just in time before that door shut. And the crew was not happy with us. This was an international flight, so it was 45 minutes before. We said, we're so sorry. We got here as fast as we could. However, we got here as fast as we could because we went to Arby's first. And they noticed that, and they said something, and Hannah will repeat this sometimes. They said, you went to Arby's first. They were upset. But they let us on the flight. But what happens in those moments? You think, I still have time. I could still go to the bathroom. I could still go get a Gatorade before the flight. I could still run to Arby's real quick and get my lunch. I still have time. And sometimes we think that spiritually. We think, I still got plenty of time. I still have more than enough time to get prepared, more than enough time to get ready. God warns us of this mentality and of this thinking. James tells us in James chapter 4 and verse 14, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. What's the picture there? The picture is of boiling water on a stovetop, and as that vapor comes up, as that steam starts to come up off the pot, off that pan, what happens? It's there, you see it, and then poof, it's gone. God gives us that picture regarding our life. In other words, time goes a lot faster than we think. Paul says it this way in the book of Ephesians in chapter 5, starting there in verse 15. Paul says, see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. Paul says, walk carefully in your life. Think about the way in which you're living. Why? Because the days are evil. In other words, the way in which you think about time, if you're not careful, it's going to get away from you. Therefore, do not be unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is. Notice what Moses will say. Moses wrote Psalm 90. Psalm 90, most of the Psalms are written by David, but Psalm 90 is actually written by Moses. And verse 12, Moses says this, so teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. What does it mean to number your days? What are some practical ways that you can do that? Well, think about it this way. How many more winters do you probably have in this life? Or if you're a little younger, how many more presidential elections do you probably have in this life? That's a way that you can start numbering your days. In other words, it helps you break down that deceptive thought of, I have plenty of time, and it allows you to condense it and realize, well, wait a second, when I think about it that way, time between a presidential election flies by, so I actually don't have that much time left. You know what? Time between winter seasons actually flies by. I actually don't have that much time left. And then you start realizing, you know what? This is the moment. This is the window. I want to gain a heart of wisdom. What is wisdom? Fearing God. Fearing God. Proverbs chapter 1. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. We grow in knowledge, we grow in wisdom when we start fearing God and we recognize He's in control. He's the one that shuts that door. So point number 3, time to prepare can be deceiving. As we close this morning and contemplate our salvation, our relationship with God, let's think about a certain instance where Paul the apostle was preaching the gospel to a ruler. And that ruler, he became interested in what it was that Paul was delivering, Agrippa. And he says to Paul in Acts chapter 26 and verse 28, he says, "You almost persuade me to become a Christian." Now, this is a ruler, and so he's high on the hog. He's well off. He's not really motivated from a physical perspective, and so he's tracked with Paul, and he's understood what Paul's explained. He's understood the gospel, and he says, "Hey, you almost persuaded me to give my life over to Christ and to become a Christian." And Paul's response in verse 29, "I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me today might become both almost and altogether such as I am, except for these chains." And of course, Paul is in prison for preaching the gospel. He's a prisoner, so he's in chains. And so he's saying, "Hey, I want everyone to become like me, a Christian, a child of God." Of course, I don't want you to be in prison, Paul's explaining. Well, how is it that Paul became a Christian? Well, we learn that he used to be Saul, and he used to persecute the church. He used to be involved in murdering Christians, Acts chapter 7 and Acts chapter 8 and verse 1. And then he's struck blind in Acts chapter 9, and a man named Ananias is told to go and preach the gospel to Saul. And the Lord says to Ananias in verse 11 of Acts 9, "Arise and go to the street called Straight and inquire at the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus, for behold, he is praying." And so Ananias is told, "You will find this Saul praying." And so while Saul was praying, later on, again, becoming the Apostle Paul, he's explaining this conversion. And so he's explaining what it was like praying, and Ananias coming up to him. And while Saul was praying in this moment, Paul, now looking backwards, explaining this in Acts 22 and verse 16, declares what Ananias said to him. "And now, why are you waiting?" Well, how was he going to find him? He was going to find him praying. Ananias found Saul praying. He comes to him, Acts 22 and verse 16, "Why are you waiting? Arise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord." How was it that Agrippa could have been saved like Saul? To arise and be baptized and wash away his sins, calling on the name of the Lord. Well, he was almost persuaded, and we may be almost persuaded, but here's the thing: we can't count on time. God is the one who shuts the door. And so are you ready to meet the Lord this morning? Are you right with the Lord? Have you been persuaded that you need to become a Christian? You need to be baptized for the remission of your sins based upon your belief and confession in Christ. We see that exemplified in Acts chapter 8, 34 through 39. We see baptism is the point in which we are saved based upon our conscience being pricked in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 21. Have you done that yet this morning? If not, you have the opportunity to do so. Once that is done, you have to then live a faithful life. Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10, we must be faithful unto death in order to receive the crown of life. Brother or sister, if you have fallen away, if you need prayers of the congregation, if you know that if the Lord shut the door right now, you wouldn't be right with him, and you're ready to make it right now before it's everlastingly too late, we're here to assist you. If you have any spiritual need, won't you please come forward as all together we stand and sing. Jesus,